different genre structures. This is one of the things that I think is just about as important as it could be, because a lot of the time when you're creating an innovation in an art form, what you're doing is you're borrowing from another art form. And that is not mine, by the way. That's something John Gardner said. I'm stealing from him. But one of the ways in which innovation happens in the arts is that maybe there's something the young people are doing, or a small culture is doing inside of a larger culture, that gets then taken and spread, and that spreading then is what amounts to many of the different literary movements and other artistic movements that have happened in the world. So that borrowing is like one of the ways in which we can constantly try to keep our art fresh. I've got a page up here from Scott McCloud's extremely famous Understanding Comics, because this is the one where he's talking about the space between panels. So, Annalise, this is for you, but it's also for everyone. One of the most important things that he identifies is that so much of the reader participation happens between panels. Like you see something, and then you see something else. But those two still pictures still need a whole calculus between them to show how we moved from one place to another. I really like the example he gives of here at the top of peekaboo and then peekaboo. The two peekaboos in a row only make sense if you kind of imagine what's happening between those panels. And here again, it's kind of literalized.
They're identical images, though.
Yeah, they're identical images. So if you somehow erased that middle image and try to imagine that, the reader would be wholly dependent on trying to make the connection of like, why are there two peekaboos here in a row? And you might make a choice and say like, maybe that's too much and I want to be less subtle than that. Or maybe you're trying to be like really participatory and have your reader really engaging at that level. I think this is one of the ways in which we should be thinking about fiction, poetry, all written arts all the time also, because when you write something, you're only writing the barest minimum of what could be written about something.
What will suffice?
If I say the greenhouse, are you picturing a greenhouse? I promise you, most people picked a different green from every other person.
I was thinking of the glass house, the greenhouse that we saw in where were we? Pittsburgh the other day.
Right. So I tried to put the pause in.
I know the first time was greenhouse and the second time was greenhouse. And I was like, oh, shouldn't I have been thinking of a greenhouse? And then I thought of a greenhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
So how you use words, you're leaving most of it up to the reader. So I'm going to pick my own green. If you say the greenhouse, did you think sage green? Did you think emerald green? Did you think malachite? Like what is it that you thought of when you thought of that word green, and what kind of house or what kind of color that house had? So this space between is one of the things that you can really think about. And one of the things that helps you think about that is by switching genres as you're writing. So if you are writing fiction and you suddenly think about it as a comic book and you start thinking about what would be inside of each panel, that can be a really helpful way of sort of like opening your mind to like a different way of describing, and maybe giving you a different vantage as to what should be included and what might not be.
Interesting, because I think writers do that a lot because they think cinematically from watching so many movies. They're like, where should I cut the scene and then start the next? But they think as in movie cuts a little bit, like now we have a cut the scene close up on somebody for the next moment. It's this interesting, like, right, where do we put our camera focus, which is not necessarily how 19th century writers could have written.
Exactly. In fact, it would have been impossible for them to have written that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, just as an example, when you think about this, like there are no words here, but you can form almost like a zoetrope of what is happening here. And you can probably assign emotions and think of a story that would go in these 5 panels here. And it all comes from the images you see, and also the things that happen in between when you start putting it together, sort of like all of the actions. And again, I bet we would come up with very different stories from each other if I asked everybody to write down what they think the story of these 5 panels is about. Different genres.